Good afternoon, kids. My name is Lisa, and I will be your tour guide for the day here in Rome, giving you all a virtual tour of a building you might be familiar with. To start off, does anyone know what this building is called? That's right, it's the Colosseum. Before we learn more about the structure, let's look back and see why it was first created.
After the Great Fire of Rome that lasted for 9 days in 64 CE, the Emperor Nero built his palace with all the new space existing in the city that used to be public. The people did not like this since they felt like there was more he could do to stop the fires, and some even speculated that he caused the fire to make room for his large palace. Then, the Colosseum was built by a man named Vespasian after Nero died in 68 CE. Vespasian was part of the Flavian emperors, and when he gained the position of emperor in 69 CE, he gave the land that Nero used for his palace and artificial lake back to the citizens of Rome. The construction was completed by Titus, the next emperor, in 80 CE. Back then, it was called the Flavian Amphitheatre, until the Middle Ages when it was called the Colosseum because of the 100-foot bronze Colossus of Nero statue that still remained from his palace. Although this was eventually taken down, the name Colosseum stayed with the structure.
Now, it didn't always look this broken down. Over the years, Roman citizens used the hundreds of thousands of travertine and concrete bricks as materials to build in later years, which slowly tore down the structure. There are 3 stories of arcades, with each arch previously filled with hundreds of statues of Roman heroes and gods or goddesses. Arches are a staple of Roman architecture and something they are famous for, so this structure is a perfect representation of that Roman technique. The arches are really interesting because they show the different eras of Roman history in order, starting with the oldest architectural style at the bottom and then the newer ones stacked on top. The top 2 stories are in Corinthian style. The second story is Ionic, and the bottom story is Tuscan order, which is a simplified Italian version of the Doric order without fluting on the columns. Out of the 80 arches in the Colosseum, only 76 were numbered. The 4 on the axes of the structure, north, south, east, and west, were not, since those are the main entrances of the structure, although citizens entered the building from all of the arches since there were no statues on the first floor. Above these 4 main entrances are inscriptions that are also very common on other Roman architecture. These tell the citizens of Rome how the Colosseum was given to the Roman people as a gift from Vespasian using the spoils of the Jewish wars. This means that they used the treasures and riches from the captured temples in Jerusalem to pay for the building of the Colosseum. Moving into the theater, the floor of the arena is made of wood planks covered in sand with some trapdoors as tops for manual elevators. These elevators were usually operated by slaves and used to bring animals up to the levels of the floor for animal fights, or for the props used in gladiatorial battles, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. These elevators were most likely connected to a huge system of underground tunnels that were a part of the Hypergeum, which was used to house the animals imported from Africa and from the Middle East, and to move scenery or slave gladiators. If you look up from here, you will see the velarium, which is a huge retractable cover at the top used to shade viewers from the sun for the longer afternoon performances. There were 3 main types of events that occurred throughout the day in the Colosseum. In the mornings, the first events would be animal hunts or animal battles. This is what the exotic animals would be used for. This included lions, tigers, bears, elephants, leopards, crocodiles, and hippos. Although these animals were usually killed in battle, smaller ones like goats and dogs would be trained to perform tricks rather than fight to entertain the audience. Around lunch, they would occasionally publicly execute the prisoners that were set to be killed in the arena. The methods of execution varied, but it was usually pretty gruesome things like crucifixion, burning, exposure to beasts, or reenactments of horrific mythological scenes. For people that did not want to watch these events, they had snack booths outside in stands with street food and entertainment during the lunch hour. The final part of the day would be the gladiatorial combats in the afternoon, which were the main event of the day. The gladiators were usually enslaved or condemned people that often ended up being killed too when they lost. They were purchased by trainers to train their whole life for these games. To make the battles more interesting, they used props and sometimes recreated famous battles in history, and the battles were carefully planned so that it could be the most entertaining. Sometimes there were even mock naval sea battles, where they would flood the stadium with water to create scenes by taking out the wooden structure and floor to fill with water and wooden boats. To actually attend these events at the Colosseum, you had to purchase a ticket, which would most likely lead you through one of the 76 entrances to your seats. With estimated up to 45,000 to 55,000 people that could fit into the Colosseum, there were many entrances and seating options for the different classes of Roman citizens. This was another opportunity for the rich people in Rome to show how rich they were. The majority of citizens walked through the small, dark passageways on the second story of the structure to get to their seats. These were the cheapest seats for the poorest classes, since they were at the top, furthest away from the action of the battles. The emperor, magistrates, and priests sat at the very bottom, since they were of the highest status. Some were even so close to the action that they needed netting to keep the spectators in the lowest seats safe. The emperor even had his own tunnel leading back to safety directly from his seat in case something went wrong. However, this was rare, since the animals were kept away from the spectators and in the arena by a ditch with stakes in it around the perimeter. Sitting a little higher than the top elite citizens were the senators, then businessmen and knights, then plebeians or the middle-class commoners. At the very top were foreigners, poorer people, and enslaved people, as well as women, since they were seen as the lowest class, unless they were elite women. The lowest class sat on temporary wooden benches at the very top, or even stood, compared to the marble benches for everyone else, that were even inscribed with the names of classes of people that were allowed to sit there. Overall, the Colosseum of Rome is so widely known because at the time it was the main form of public entertainment that brought society together and furthered the different classes, since it was a visual representation of your status in society. This is very interesting to historians since it shows how closely acts of violence and theatrical events were held together, even though it was eventually frowned upon later during the spread of Catholicism with Christian pilgrims. They transformed the structure into a more religious symbol. However, throughout the ages, the Colosseum will always be a symbol for the power Rome has as an empire, and it is an important tool to analyze the ways that Roman society worked. That ends our tour of the Colosseum. Hopefully this gave you a better idea of what this remarkable structure is all about, so that you can teach others about the Roman Empire and maybe even visit us here someday.